everybody. I hope everybody's having a good time today. I am Michael. I'm a member of technical staff here at Anthropic working on Claude Managed Agents.
What's up, everybody? My name is Harrison, and I'm also a member of technical staff working on Claude Managed Agents.
A lot of members of technical staff.
Yeah.
OK, so today we want to talk to you about Claude Managed Agents. But before we do that, we wanted to do a quick recap over the last couple of years and the exponential that I think everybody in this room has been experiencing. After that, we'll talk a little bit about the motivations behind why we built Claude Managed Agents, followed by a deep dive into some of the primitives that we offer with Claude Managed Agents. And then afterwards, we will bring out some of the partners that we've been working with on some of the new features that we announced today. And then we'll wrap it up with a little bit of a getting started. Cool. So AI capabilities over the last couple of years have been on like an absolute rocket ship of like an exponential. I think, like I said, everybody here has been kind of experiencing that. We started with like the Claude 3 kind of family of models. And even back then, like you were starting to see the semblance of really capable things starting to happen. But really, you could only really get like very simple, short things going. Then with Opus 4, we went on an absolute tear. And things like Claude Code started like becoming really, really prominent. And then these days, with some of the newer model families that we have, we're seeing that like the bottleneck towards increasing capabilities is really the infrastructure around these models and not so much the intelligence for them. So yeah, like I said, with Opus 3, you could maybe have Claude like generate a test function for you. Maybe you would steer it a lot throughout, and you were like approving every single tool that you were doing. And then with Opus 4 and Claude Code coming around, you were able to maybe have it drive an entire feature. It could maybe put up a PR for you, but you were still steering it a lot throughout the way. And then with Opus 4.7, the newest model that we have, like Boris mentioned earlier, people are clearing their entire backlogs and are waking up to like a bunch of merge-ready PRs, which is amazing to see. Who doesn't love waking up in the morning to a bunch of PRs that you have to review? And where we think we're seeing things going in the future is entire quarters worth of work being able to be getting accomplished within a couple of hours. So you can imagine a full M&A pipeline being done end-to-end with like a swarm of agent teams. And when these agents work for like a couple of hours, things like prompt plus tool use are OK. But really where we start or where we need to start getting going is towards like task completion and overall agent infrastructure pipelines.
But in order for your agents to be able to accomplish more, they need access to more. And that's where Claude Managed Agents is here to help you manage some of the complexity. You can imagine that if you have an entire team running an M&A deal, they need access to secure credentials, internal systems. If you're making code changes, you need access to your private GitHub repositories and the credentials that allow that kind of access. And additionally, you need identity and auth for your agents. This is essentially an identifier for who they are. Like, I as an engineer have access to Slack and my email and a bunch of tools internally like that. Our agents are going to need access to those systems as well. But additionally, we're seeing more and more different conversational methodologies for interacting with our agents. The first is probably the most familiar with a lot of folks, which is you send the agent text and it gives you a response conversationally. But we're seeing more of a transition towards outcome-oriented agentic activity. So this is, again, give the M&A deal that needs to happen to the agent and the agent set, and have them just go off and accomplish the task, coming back to you only when they feel relatively confident that the entire activity is complete. Additionally, as an agent platform, we'd be remiss to not support other methodologies of interacting with your agents, like starting an agent and then picking it up later on, maybe weeks or months in the future when you want the agent to pick back up right where it left off.
So it was very clear that we're going to start expecting a lot out of these agents, and our developers will as well. When we were doing a bunch of research as we were starting to develop something like Claude Managed Agents, we saw a lot of key sticking points around infrastructure and primitive development that really stood out. So the first of which was figuring out things like context management and memory. These things are things that work really, really well if they are working, but if you get it wrong, it can like completely destroy how well your agents are going to work. And infrastructure concerns was another kind of like big sticking point. It was actually the #1 thing that was cited as preventing people from being able to like skate the exponential and like really benefit from these improved model intelligences. You need things like reliability, scalability, security, even latency starts mattering when you're having these things running prod. And then finally, none of this really matters if you don't have observability into what these things are doing. If you can't tell whether or not your agent is succeeding or doing things successfully, it doesn't really matter. Like, how can you even assess that the thing is good? So with Claude Managed Agents, we did all of that platform work so that you don't have to, so that you can kind of pick and choose the primitives that we have available out of the box around infrastructure, agent primitives, and observability, all available on the Claude Platform, where you can kind of pick and choose the composable primitives that we have and kind of like build your product on top of them.
Cool, so that's a lot. How do you actually get started building with Claude Managed Agents? The first step is just to define an agent. This is essentially a bundle of configuration that identifies who your agent is and what it can do. It's a system prompt, model, skills, tools, permissions, and generally just the identity of the thing that's actually taking the action. Second, you need an environment in which the agent will actually run. So really helps to give Claude access to a computer. In this case, your agent needs a sandboxing environment where you can configure the network allow list and pre-installed packages within that environment. When all that's ready to go, you can actually kick off the session. Ask your agent to go and complete some piece of work, and then come back to you when it's ready to rock. And through it all, if you want to observe the agent as it's doing its thing, cooking, you can just listen to the event stream and understand what the agent is doing, why it's doing it, and generally interact with it in whatever way you see fit.
So let's demystify what we mean when we're talking about this event stream. Every session that you start in Claude Managed Agents is effectively a log of events that you have where you or your end users are interacting with Claude, and Claude's responding. So we kind of like split up the domains of events that we have within the platform so that it's easier for you to kind of understand what each event means. The first of which is user events. These are things that your own end users or maybe your platform is sending to Claude Managed Agent sessions. These could include text messages, images, documents. You can interrupt your agent if you see that it's going off course and you want to steer it back onto its track. Tool results for custom tools that you implement and execute on your end. And even confirmations for human-in-the-loop controls for any tools that are executed on Anthropic servers. And then finally, we have outcome definitions, which we'll go into a little bit more detail about later. Next, we have agent events. Agent events are anything that Claude is really doing on its side. So this could be responding to the user with a message, executing tools on its end, or coordinating with other agents, which we'll go into a little bit more detail later. Next, we have the session events. These are just like the overall lifecycle of the session itself. So any descriptions around the status of the session changing from idle to running, error recovery, and information about the sorts of errors that Claude is running into, and outcome processing. And then finally, we have span events, which make it really, really easy to understand when certain things are starting and ending, like Claude starting to write together a really, really long response.
So we know that's a ton of information, so let's make it concrete by doing a quick demo of Pascal, a fictitious agent that's responsible for understanding a little bit more about grocery shopping habits of our users. So if we jump into the demo, we're going to start by showing our dashboard that's integrated with Managed Agents. And we're kicking off an analysis run, where we've clicked this Analyze button in the top right. Jumping back to the console, where we can see everything that the agent is doing in real time, we can see the list of events that are coming through the event stream, tool runs, agent events, generally understanding what's happening in real time. On the right side, you can see our agentic definition. This includes the system prompt, model, and all of the MCP tool configuration that I was talking about earlier. And as we click into the environment, we can also see our networking configuration as well as the packages that we've installed into our container. Jumping back to our application, we can see all of this shown on our surface because all of this is exposed via an API. And what's that? Claude came back, found some bits for us. Looks like bananas are super popular, I guess.
I like bananas.
Cool. And also jumping forward, if you want to avoid the crowds, it turns out that Sunday is not the right time to go shopping for groceries. But then that's not enough for us. We want to understand more about how our shoppers are going to behave in the future. So we had our agent go ahead and kick off predictive analysis and reorder probabilistic understanding of our users. But again, that's not enough for us. We want our agent to get even better over time, and we want to improve the way that it interacts with these sessions. So we've clicked this Ask Claude button in the top right, where Claude is actually reading the transcript of our session and is offering inputs for how we can optimize the way that we've configured it. So in this case, it's a little bit small, but on the right side, we'll see that a Python script ran for over 20 seconds. This is a Python script that we uploaded to the session, and maybe there's a chance for us to optimize that runtime so things can feel a little bit snappier for our users. So in a nutshell, that's a whirlwind tour of the console and many of the features that we support out of the box with Managed Agents. So as we jump forward, as developers, you might want to go ahead and figure out how to get started. If you have Claude Code installed, which I hope many of you do, it's my favorite tool of all, feel free to just jump in and use the skill that we ship with with Claude Code directly, in the Claude API skill. It knows all about managed agents and will make getting integrated an absolute breeze. Second, we also have shipped a CLI that lets you interact with your agents in your sessions extremely seamlessly via a very simple command line interface. And lastly, if you just want to see some examples of real code, copy-paste ready, you can fit for whatever your needs might be, we have a set of cookbooks that'll show off what it looks like to integrate with all of our API surfaces.
So we covered a lot of the basics, but I wanted to go over some of the more advanced features that we've been releasing over the last couple of weeks, just so that you are all kind of aware of them. So the first is probably my favorite, is multi-agent orchestration. It allows Claude to spawn other agent threads with their own context windows in order to delegate work to them. And the cool aspect of it is that Claude can pass these messages back and forth to other Claudes in order for them to do whatever specialized work they get to do. Outcomes allows you as an end user to define a rubric or a set of goals for Claude to be able to iterate towards getting towards. So after it does its kind of first pass iteration of something, it'll start triggering its outcome grading, and we'll keep going like that in a loop until it feels like it's satisfied with the outputs it's given you. Memory allows Claude to kind of get better over time by reading and writing from these long-lived memory stores, which makes every session kind of better than the last that it's had. And then finally, we have dreaming, which we announced in research preview, which allows Claude to kind of like reflect and codify over like thousands of sessions all at once in order to produce new memories, edit existing ones, and really make sure that the memories that we're dealing with are top-notch.
And earlier this morning, you heard us announce 2 new features that'll make your agents even more powerful. The first is self-hosted sandboxes, effectively giving you the option to bring your own compute infrastructure to Claude if you want to run tools within your own VPC. Shout out to our partners at Cloudflare, Daytona, Modal, and Vercel, who we've been working with to support this seamlessly out of the box. And second, we shipped a feature in research preview called MCP tunnels, which is basically a way for you to expose your private MCP servers directly to Claude via managed agents without ever having to expose anything over the public internet directly.
And just diving a little bit deeper into how self-hosted sandboxes work, you can bring your own kind of sandboxing infrastructure fleet where you can contain your own private files, your own services, packages. You get to kind of control how these sandboxes are provisioned without using our kind of like native Anthropic cloud sandboxes. Inside your own perimeter, you can control things like network policies, your audit logs, when these sandboxes are spawned and idled. And everything there is kind of in your control without kind of having to see that over to Claude Managed Agents. All we'll do is just send you a signal whenever we need to have a new sandbox be provisioned because Claude needs to do some work in there. And the nice aspect of it is that you can either use your own sandboxing fleet or use one of the partners that we just mentioned earlier today in order to get started with all of this.
And let's talk a little bit about MCP tunnels. MCP tunnels, again, are basically just a way for you to get your private MCPs in your network exposed to Claude Managed Agents without having to do any fancy network configuration on your side. Essentially, all you have to do is expose a really basic proxy layer to our MCP tunnels, enabling your network infrastructure to speak directly with Claude via a secure tunnel in the middle.
OK, so in order to get a little bit deeper about private sandboxes or self-hosted sandboxes, I wanted to welcome to the stage Mike from Cloudflare, Yvonne from Daytona, Akshat from Modal, and Luke from Vercel to talk a little bit more about this. Bye, Harrison. Hey, hi. Good to see you. Hi, friends. How are we doing?
Hey there.
Do you guys mind if we like take a selfie real quick? I think that's like a trend here.
We would love
I think it's mandatory, right?
Okay. Here. Nice. You look great. Okay, cool. Thanks everybody for joining us. You all run companies or work at companies that run sandboxing fleets for agent, but you've all built them slightly differently. And I'm curious what you are each individually kind of betting on here. Luke, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's foundational to us is we build all of our infrastructure on top of like the same foundation. So we kind of talked about this as fluid compute. Internally, we've kind of called it a system of Hive. And that allows us to give everyone basically just like the full VM. That's for, whether you're running a build, a sandbox, or a function. And for us, that really means that all of these things interop really well. We can reuse like the same features between them. So stuff like we've just made public our like firewall for Sandboxes, where you can filter traffic and inject secrets and stuff like that. Well, we can build that for one thing and reuse it across it all. So the same primitive is really flexible from that way. And I think that's really powerful for when you're building something like Claude Managed Agents, and you can call it from a function into a sandbox and vice versa.
Yeah, nice. Akshat?
Yeah, so Modal is a compute platform that we've built for today's use cases. And one of the things we are really good at is we run a lot of compute across the world. So we can, since we have our own scheduler, we can spin up hundreds of thousands of sandboxes in order of minutes, which we're betting on the fact that people need a lot of scale, and they want to get to that scale really quickly for use cases like RL. We also run in every region that you can imagine, so you can get low latency if you care about low latency from US West or EU West. And we were really designed around flexibility. So one of the things we have is we think a lot about persistent volumes, like how can you customize that? How can you customize your images? And also we have GPUs. And GPU sandboxes are actually a pretty big growing use case for us.
Nice. Yvonne?
Yeah, so for us, so Daytona, we are a company that started out building sandboxes from scratch. And so we had one definite principle that we were thinking about when we were building this, or insight. It was that agents will need what humans need. And so when we think about when we started this, at that time, a lot of people were just doing code execution boxes for the most part. But what we sort of understood was that agents, like humans, will need like different sort of size and specs, CPU, RAM, memory, different operating systems, CPUs, GPUs, like everything that humans need for agents, the humans need to get their job done, agents will need as well. But the difference is you have to have that at insane amount of speed and scale, and things like pausing, resuming, forking, so that agents can try multiple outcomes. And so when we were building out Daytona, we're like, oh, nothing that exists in the market today can offer that from an infrastructure perspective. And similar to you guys, we built our own scheduler to basically enable this. So yeah.
Nice. It's amazing. Mike?
Yeah, so Cloudflare, we're kind of, one of our big bets is actually on like two different sandboxing primitives. So we have the micro VM, which is, if your agent is acting like a developer, you give it everything a developer has. You can run CLI tools, compile Rust or whatever. But we also have this different isolate, which is a different sandboxing technology called isolates, which we think in the long term, like as the price of intelligence drops and 2 years from now, the sonnets of the world are running at Opus scale, we're just gonna get a massive, massive amount of agents, and we're just gonna run out of compute, right? And like we need something that can scale even more aggressively than a micro VM. And so we have this other technology that can still do sandboxing, it can still isolate your processes, but it spins up in milliseconds. You can still write files, you can still execute arbitrary code, but it's actually like much more lightweight. You're actually like running multiple tenants in a single process. So the ability to kind of flex between these two different sandboxing technologies is a big part of what we're focusing on at Cloudflare in the future.
Oh, that's awesome. Wide variety of answers too. I'm curious, now that self-hosted sandboxes are kind of out and we've partnered with all of you, is there anything that you're like really excited to see people starting to build on your platforms with managed agents?
I think for me, I'm in the management chain, and so one of the things I've been thinking about is this idea of everything that was asynchronous is now synchronous, and vice versa, right? And that vice versa is like really important. So all of the synchronization that you used to have to do, that you would spend time coding, and then you'd have to find time to like take a meeting to get the product alignment or something like that. Now that's kind of where I spend the majority of my time, and agents allow me to delegate all of that kind of asynchronous work into the background like much more effectively. The way I've kind of been thinking about this is like everyone now has a chief of staff, that used to be like an executive role. Every engineer can have a chief of staff, like doing market research, trying to understand the product that they're working on more, how customers are using it, and stuff like that. And so I think that for me is where I'm like super excited to see. Essentially, people have talked about this as like personal software or something, but I really kind of think about it as like that everyone's now got a personal assistant. And I think that's just going to be super powerful for everyone in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many use cases. Like, for example, we have DoorDash as a customer. They're automating account management with agents. But one thing that I am personally very excited about is, I don't know how many of you guys have heard of Karpathy's auto research thing, but it's basically Claude can optimize training loops. And what we found success with on our inference team, actually, is they can have Claude optimize inference. So you can give it a workload and a benchmark, and it'll basically hill climb it and make it better. It'll run like the NVIDIA profiler, it'll read the profiles, and it'll just go ham and make things better. And it all runs on Modal because we have GPU sandboxes. So this is something that people are running right now manually, but with CMA, I'm excited to actually make this a background agent that just works from Slack.
Yeah, you can give it some like outcomes, and it can go ahead and iterate on it. Ivan?
Yeah, so there's so many things being built that we're excited about, and so I don't know if I have enough time to talk about that. I can tell you the most exciting, and then we can loop back on the less so, which is for me, which is essentially that right now I feel that the thing that are stopping the progression of agents getting tasks done is essentially infrastructure now, not the models itself. Whereas we can now, and I've seen this, people have maybe heard of it, not heard of it, the term is like the human emulator. Essentially, anything that a human can do digitally or a digital knowledge worker, you can now have an agent do if you give it a sandbox. So for an example, you have agents that can do reporting or whatnot, but they can't give you an actual end-to-end report because some of the data might be locked in a legacy application inside of a Windows machine or Windows desktop application. And so having an agent spin up a sandbox that it can access the things through an API for the most part, but if it doesn't, it can actually install the application or log into the system and then give you an end-to-end result is something that I think is insanely fascinating right now. And I think that is a big unlock going forward.
Yeah. Mike?
Cool. Yeah, so when we launched the Managed Agents integration, we really leaned into programmability and customization. So you can reach very easily write tools that now reach into the rest of Cloudflare. And I'm really excited to have all of that just very readily available and programmable. So I don't know, I'm just thinking personally, we have our new email service. And so we wrote something that gives every agent an email address and it can send email. And you can customize this. Or we also have our browser rendering service. So you can run a browser and run arbitrary control and have audit logs and whatnot. And so I'm excited for just the toolbox of all these other things being very readily available and just write a little bit of JavaScript and customize it for your needs.
Very exciting. So Ivan, I just spent 2 minutes earlier talking about the exponential and how it's just wild, these model intelligences increasing this quickly. Is there anything that you've seen your customers building now that they weren't able to build 6 months ago?
So the one I mentioned is probably that, but another thing that's interesting for me is essentially the idea of continuous learning, which is essentially, so Daytona and I assume others here, we have two basic use cases. One is background agents and one is reinforcement learning. And we have some customers that are essentially enabling their customers to, against the data that they have every day, every week, every month, essentially take that data and do RL. And then in the morning or the next day, they actually have a more intelligent model, right? And so I think that is actually quite interesting. And we see that being built on the platform today.
Yeah, wow, that'll be really, really cool to see. Akshat, I'm curious, from your perspective at Modal, what do you think is the next infrastructural thing that we will need for agents after Sandboxes?
Yeah, I'm sure you guys are thinking about this a bunch as well, but we are really interested in figuring out how do we improve isolation and permission boundaries for agents. So for example, can you run Claude Agent SDK in the same sandbox as code execution, but actually have better isolation between the two? It's more of a short-term thing. I think longer term, there's so much stuff to play with compute and storage in particular. So I think the design space of persistent storage there's a lot more stuff. Can you spawn sub-agents that fork off what you have right now? And maybe they can time travel back and visit previous states. Another thing we're thinking about is people deploy stuff from sandboxes to modal functions. So once something works, you then make it a deployed endpoint, but then how do we equip the agent to actually sort of reify its own code and update it in place? There's a lot of cool stuff coming.
Yeah, yeah. And Mike, I think we were talking about this a little bit backstage, but what do you think is one of the harder problems with running agents at scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some infrastructure challenges with scaling up, but actually when we are talking to companies and trying to deploy these things, and we even feel it internally, it's very easy to get some vibe coded platform where people are spinning up agents internally, but actually deploying that means that there are all these security challenges that you have to face, and there are so many layers to it. So how do we properly filter egress? How do we properly assign identities to agents? And if that agent then creates another agent that goes and creates a site, how do we properly assign identity all the way down the chain such that it's only getting access to the right data? And there are some protocols that are going around that I don't think the industry is unified on, that we should. And then lastly, how do you get every service behind something that understands that identity, right? Whether it's a private service, you all have the MCP tunnels that you just launched. There's lots of challenges like that where, hey, I have to expose all my data across my company, across a bunch of different platforms to all speak the same language auth-wise. So I think that's one of the bigger challenges right now.
Yeah, it's very interesting seeing how everybody across the entire tech industry is trying to solve a lot of the same problems right now. Well, with that, Luke, I'm curious what assumptions have been breaking over at Vercel when the end user that's emitting the traffic for you is not a human, but is instead an agent.
Yeah, I think there's so many different avenues that you really have to rethink when agents are doing the majority of your compute, your requests. To kind of touch on what Mike was just saying is authentication is one of these things, which is if I have permission to do something, should an agent have permission to do it on behalf of me? Should we distinguish between those two things? One of the things I was just thinking about as well is this idea of, we kind of mentioned storage and stuff like that, of, well, when I pause a task, I can kind of keep where I am in memory. And so that resumability of tasks is just something that everyone is still really working to solve. And I think one of the things that stuff like Managed Agents does really well, and a lot of these kind of harnesses that we have already for doing work, there's still that very synchronous single player activity. And so what I expect to see is kind of the multiplayer game completely change. And that will also be something that, again, we haven't really understood how to do. We can't all get around a program, a laptop like we used to, and mob program, kind of as we did 10 years ago. And agents kind of, once they're on a track, they're oh, I've got a plan. I'm just going to execute. I just want to kind of hit that function of achieving what I've set out to do. Whereas humans have that ability to kind of go off of each other and say, oh, I think the plan has changed and we should diverge. Yeah. So I think there's a lot that we still have to answer, and the harnesses are still very powerful in that regard. But yeah, we're definitely not completely solved yet.
Yeah, totally. OK, thank you, everybody, for joining me. And thank you, everybody, for joining me. I hope you learned some stuff and had some fun. Go try Claude Managed Agents.